I'm all in favour of trying to fix the issues of leasehold management, but not, as I said, management, not ownership. I think the system of ownership makes a lot of sense and it clearly works, but it's the management that is the problem. In an ideal world, I've said this earlier, is that every building would have a retired conveyancer sitting on the board who would know what's going on. I have something to look forward to. But we don't seem to have that at the moment. So is this really fixing the problem, or is it just changing the paint?
Welcome to Listen Without Prejudice, your exclusive gateway to one of London's leading law firms. In each episode, we dive deep into the stories, insights, and expertise that make Bishop Sewell a trusted name in the legal community. Join us as we explore everything from the latest legal trends and case studies to practical advice on residential and commercial property, corporate and commercial law, employment, family and divorce matters, private clients, and dispute resolution. Whether you're a legal professional, a client, or simply curious about the law, Listen Without Prejudice is here to inform, inspire, and engage. Now, without further ado, let's get the conversation started.
Hello and welcome back to the Bishop Sewell podcast. I'm Charlie Davidson, a senior associate in the residential team here at Bishop Sewell, and once again I'm joined by Mr. Leasehold himself, or is it going to be Mr. Commonhold moving forward, Mr. Marchik?
Indeed, thank you, Charlie. Well, lots of changes recently, haven't there been? So yes, we've got a lot to think about.
I know. I remember when I came into the law that I was told property was very dull and nothing was changing, and for when I was training, not a lot did change, and we seem to have endless things dropping into us from time to time. So I think the thing we have to talk about now is that white paper.
Indeed. So let's talk about that now. So the Commonhold white paper, on the 3rd of March, the government published its white paper in response to the Law Commission's consultation previously on reforming the law. And perhaps it's worth just saying a couple of words about what Commonhold is. It's a new species of freehold land. It means you can have a freehold flat because at the moment you can only have a leasehold flat. And the government thinks that Commonhold is the way to go. And indeed, they'd actually like to phase out leasehold so that we won't be able to have leasehold flats in the future. And that's certainly got some press and media attention. And I think there's a bit of a misnomer around that. So I think it's clear, perhaps one of the first things we ought to say to those listening is that it's not going to be the case that at some point in the immediate future, all flats will be converted into this wonderful new thing, which is Commonhold. It's something that's likely to come on stream for new developments. And it's something which is likely to enable people to convert from leasehold to Commonhold once it's been made fit for purpose. And perhaps that comes back to the central question. That's why we've got the white paper itself, because it's something that is on the statute books at the minute. I mean, Charlie, we have Commonhold at the minute. Have you ever dealt with one?
Nope, no one. I haven't dealt with it. No one I know has ever dealt with one. I think it was created under the 93 Act.
2002 Act.
Oh, beg your pardon, 2002
It's been
Act.
enforced since 2004.
See, this is how I've never had to deal with it. This is why I don't know the Act.
Well, because I'm old enough to remember when it first came in.
But it didn't really take off. I mean, no one seemed to be terribly interested. I think there was something like maybe 4 Commonholds.
Yeah, I think there are now 15 or 16 or something like that. And it's often said, and it's true, there are more textbooks written about Commonhold than there are, in fact, Commonhold developments.
I mean, we could probably do a whole podcast on this, but why didn't it work originally?
Well, okay, so I think the version of Commonhold we've got in the UK, and it's interesting because Commonhold exists in other jurisdictions. So you go to Australia, Canada, New Zealand, other common law jurisdictions, even America has condominium title. They have a similar system. So it does work elsewhere in the world. But the version of Commonhold that we adopted was a bit like what you might call Commonhold Light. So it's quite unsophisticated. It might work for a block of 3 or 4 or 6 or 10 flats, but it certainly wouldn't be appropriate for a large urban regeneration scheme or a multi-use development with lots of different parts to it. And I could go into some detail about what's wrong with it at the moment. It's well written about, well researched. But some things, for instance, the service charge proportion, there's no service charge in Commonhold, so we call it a Commonhold community assessment, but your proportion of that is fixed. It can't be varied. That's obviously a mistake. There are some concerns around insolvency. What will happen if the Commonhold association comes to an end? Because a Commonhold is a situation where you have a freehold flat and then an interest in a company that owns the main structure and the remainder of the building. And you need both of those interests to have valid title. But of course, if the company goes to the wall, and we know from our experience with freehold companies and management companies, generally sometimes people forget to file things. If that company gets struck off, you end up with defective title. So unlike with leasehold at the minute where you could just bring in a new company, you'd have to bring the existing company back and you'd have to pay all its debts off. And those debts would definitely be the debts of the members, so the unit holders would have to pay all that off. That's one area of concern. The other area of concern, lenders are concerned because the Commonhold owners can take a vote to bring the Commonhold to an end with 80% of the available votes. Now, that sounds perhaps democratic, a building's beyond its useful lifetime, perhaps that's the right thing to do. But then from another point of view, if you've got a mortgage over one of these interests, you're only one of many people. There might be 10, 15, 20 flats there. You're not going to feel very happy as the bank if suddenly the thing has come to an end. And what's happened to your interest? Where's your equity of redemption? Where's your money? And there are other things as well. So what's proposed with the Commonhold White Paper is to hark back to some work done by the Law Commission back in 2018, where the Law Commission, who are an independent, non-governmental body, were charged with the idea of looking at the law in relation to Commonhold and seeing what could be done to reform it, to make it fit for purpose for the 21st century. And they made a number of significant recommendations for change. And what this white paper does is, broadly speaking, enact all of those. It says the government wants to adopt those. That's the first step. The next step will be legislation, and we're nowhere near legislation. So we anticipate a new Commonhold and Leasehold reform bill, which will come out at some point, perhaps during the course of this year, we are told. It's such a large piece of legislation, it's likely to be broken down perhaps into more than one chunk. And indeed, I've heard Matthew Pennycook say that potentially this is something that will end up being 2 bills. So it might even take beyond the lifetime of this particular session of Parliament because it's such a large piece of work. So those are some things to bear in mind.
I mean, it's seeking to rewrite around 100 years worth of common law and statute. I mean, the Law of Property Act 1925 was I think it's the last time we had such a big shake-up, which reduced estates down to the 2 we're common with, which is leasehold
and freehold.
So the question really I think everyone's asking is, why are we bothering? I mean, we've got 100 years of precedent. Leasehold works. Clearly it works. Banks have been lending on it quite happily. Where's the political impetus coming from? Why are they pushing this forward at the moment? And why does the word feudal keep being thrown around?
Well, there's a lot of questions there, aren't there? So let's just take some of those and have a look at them. I mean, feudal, interesting. That's a very contentious word to use, potentially a bit of a hot sort of or difficult topic. Often said that perhaps it's historically inaccurate because leasehold is not feudal. It doesn't come from the Middle Ages. There were feudal types of land tenure, but those
copyhold being one of them.
Copyhold, exactly. All of those were abolished with the Law of Property Act 1925, a time at which actually a lot of conveyancers retired, in fact, because there were so many massive reforms, and it brought in registered title and all these other things. But I have heard it said that it's not, whilst it might be a misdescription, it's not a mischaracterization. Now, of course, that's a subjective viewpoint, and you'd have to be somebody who feels they're on the wrong end of the stick in a leasehold arrangement where the landlord holds all the cards and you're feeling that you're having charges imposed upon you unfairly, and there's lots of external problems that you're not in control of. And in that situation, I suppose you might use that as a metaphor for the way you're feeling. And so in that case, perhaps that is a more legitimate use of the word, but I don't pass a view on that either way. If you ask me personally, I think the leasehold system is not broken. I think it does work. I think it can work. If you have a share of freehold and a 999-year lease and you don't pay any ground rent and you're in control of the management of your property, what is to be gained by going to some other form of land tenure? I'm not entirely sure. But that's probably not what the white paper is aiming at. The white paper is aiming at new builds and bringing in a sea change and bringing in what would be seen as being perhaps a significant shift in mindset. So what is said with Commonhold is that it's a situation where, because everyone's in control of their own destiny from day one, they're both directors or have the right to be directors and are members of the Commonhold company. The association owns the main parts and have a membership right through their ownership of their unit, that they all have to take a vote on day one about the future expenditure for the building. And because of that inherent democracy is only them in the loop, they would then know, well, look, this is what we said we're going to spend. That's the budget. It's set. It's done. Move on. Can't be any scope for argument, which sounds ideal. And imagine that, Charlie. No one ever disagreeing about charges in relation to commonly owned property? Of course.
No, what a wonderful sort of dream that is, though. I mean, unfortunately, in my experience, because a lot of the properties we deal with, because there are so many statutes and rights and everything, that more and more common is when people buy flats, it is a share of freehold situation. So they do have a 999-year lease. It goes on forever, in effect. They have no ground rent and they are in control of the management. They still have arguments, they still have disputes. So I'm not 100% sold on this. I mean, you mentioned earlier about this being more geared towards new build estates. I mean, we can all remember the fury and the anger that went up about the escalating ground rents for new build houses. Obviously, this will be wonderful if this makes life easier for these new build housing estates with the managed roads and everything else like that. But what about people who already have leasehold flats? What about all the millions and millions of leaseholders in just the London area? What happens to them?
It's possible to convert to Commonhold. So once the laws change, I mean, it would be possible at the moment, but I think it would be an ill-advised step because of the concerns that lenders have in relation to it. But once the system is reformed, it should be possible to then take a vote the question will be what the threshold will be for that. Would it require 100%, which is what it would require at the moment, for people to then decide they don't want leasehold anymore? They're going to incorporate this new commonhold structure, have the commonhold type of freehold title for their flat, and embark on this new journey. Now, on one level, yes, that sounds like a great idea. I mean, as a lawyer, speaking personally, and as somebody who works in this particular business, of course, if people want to transact that and that's viable, that will be work, clearly. But whether that'll be necessary or not is a different question. I think there's an element of saying, well, look, if you've already got control of the management through an ownership of a share in a company that owns the freehold, you've got the power to back or sack the managing agent. You don't have an issue with your lease length or ground rent. There's maybe not too much to change, actually. Now, that might not be a particular politically popular point of view, because I think there is a sense of trying to introduce something new and better. But actually, in that situation, you've probably got as much control as you're likely to have. And the only differential that I've heard mentioned in relation to that is to say that the commonhold structure is predicated on setting the budget up front. It comes from the point of view that you have to set and agree the expenditures first. But that, of course, is the reality of that situation where you own the share in the freehold company. And I could go on because there's some other big differences. One of the differences with commonhold, the service charge legislation won't apply to the commonhold community assessment. So at the moment, if you don't like the size and scale of the charges, you could take those to the first tier tribunal. They could be adjudicated to be needing to be changed. Whereas with the commonhold community assessment, at the moment, the situation is it's fixed, and that's it. No argument. Now, good for no debates, but could be difficult in terms of people perhaps feeling they've had things unjustly imposed on them. And you haven't touched on another big point, which I think is this one, which is that if you're going to run your own building, you're going to need directors. And I think, tell me about the experience you've had of working with freehold company directors.
Well, as you know, I act for quite a few of the buildings with their own freehold directors, including but not limited to my own building. And the problem that I've always found with them is very rarely ever to do with the leases themselves or the legal title or anything else to do with that, though. It's largely to do with deciding what are they going to do, making a decision. And you hope, pray is another word for it, that there'll be at least one person who is proactive and understands what's going on. The difficulty is, as I see it, having part-time directors who outsource to a managing agent on a part-time basis makes a lot of sense if you're only dealing with, 4 flats, 5 flats, 10 flats. But if you have a building which has, let's say 88 flats in it, and a communal area that needs to be managed and insurance, and maybe there's a few old caretaker flats there, in my experience, you need at least one person who can dedicate, not full-time, but certainly be a bit more on the ball and simply saying, I'll deal with it in the weekend, because that's where things fall into disrepair. I mean, a lot of people have been commenting regarding the Scottish ownership method, though, and there have been some issues there where buildings fall into disrepair because there's no active management. And I'm all in favour of trying to fix the issues of leasehold management, but not, as I said, management, not ownership. I think the system of ownership makes a lot of sense and it clearly works, but it's the management that is the problem. In an ideal world, I've said this earlier, is that every building would have a retired conveyancer sitting on the board who would know what's going on. I have something to look forward to, but we don't seem to have that at the moment. So is this really fixing the problem, or is it just changing the paint?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Charlie. I think I fully agree with that. I think one of the biggest concerns is management, because if you take a block of any size, scale or complexity, you need professional managers. If you're going to have complicated infrastructure, lifts, air conditioning, car lifts, all sorts of things you can find in modern developments, it's wrong to think that people can manage that for themselves. It was never in contemplation. One of the more pleasing things in the white paper is the suggestion for larger developments that it will be mandatory to have a managing agent on the board of these commonhold companies. And I think that's absolutely essential to ensure they don't get into difficulty in the future. I mean, democracy is a great thing when it comes to setting the charges, but ultimately it's the quality of the management which will protect the long-term value of the interest. And that, I think, is something that people need to focus in on. So would this put more power in people's hands? Yes, potentially, but people have to be willing to serve. They have to be willing to accept that responsibility. And if no one will accept that responsibility, then there could be a very difficult scenario. And that might be one scenario in which leasehold is perhaps preferable to freehold, commonhold rather, because you actually have somebody external will take those decisions. Now, no, that's not necessarily a popular point of view, but it would remove that issue from people being unwilling to take those responsibilities in relation to their own destiny.
But considering the number of stakeholders in this, professional managing bodies, your own group, ALEP, various freeholders and lenders and everything else that's going to be going on and basically overriding 100 years of legislation and common law, I take it this isn't going to be done in a week.
I think it's really important to understand that. I mean, the changes necessary to Commonhold, in my mind, that it's 2 to 3 years down the track. We don't have a draft bill yet or anything in front of Parliament. But even once we do, to bring those changes into effect is not going to be an overnight process. It could be another 3, 4, 5 years down the line. What Mr. Pennycook has said he wants to do is bring forward legislation during the course of this Parliament to bring leasehold to an end. So whether that's just enabling legislation that will say that in a future date or from a future date, all flats will have to be commonhold, new build, that's possible potentially. But will he actually reform the system and get that change enacted by then? I am not so sure. I think it's a bigger piece than that. I think even government recognises that. And perhaps one of the more encouraging things just coming out of the various government policy statements on this, including the statement that Mr. Pennycook made on the 21st of November, was the idea that he sees the need to balance speed with care. I think that's really important. I think the lessons of the past in reforming the law in this area have been that people have moved things forward too quickly, and as a result, there have been problems. I think it's really important to pause, get this right, and make sure that whatever change is brought in is effective.
So we'll still have work to deal with.
Well, a pleasure to talk about in the future. Yes, Charlie, indeed. Yes.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Charlie.
That's all for today's episode of Listen Without Prejudice. Whether you're navigating a property transaction, a corporate, commercial, or family matter, we're here to guide you every step of the way. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes, where we'll continue to explore the latest trends and challenges across our core practice areas. Do you have a question or topics you'd like us to cover? Or do you want to reach one of our experts? Feel free to get in touch via LinkedIn or through our website, bishopandsewell.co.uk. Thanks again for tuning in. Be sure to join us in our next episode, where the conversation continues. Until then, take care.